Most people imagine cyber attacks as something extremely sophisticated. They picture advanced hacking tools, elite programmers, and complex attacks that take months to execute. But the uncomfortable reality is that many of the largest security breaches in the world don't begin with advanced technology at all. They begin with something incredibly small. Sometimes it's a reused password. Sometimes it's a forgotten test account. Sometimes it's a cheap piece of software that was never updated. In many cases, the door into $1 million company was opened by a mistake that cost almost nothing to fix.
BreachBytes TV.
In cybersecurity, attackers are rarely looking for the hardest way into a system. They are looking for the easiest one. In large organizations, despite having massive security budgets, often have more small weaknesses simply because they operate at such a large scale. Thousands of employees, thousands of devices, dozens of software platforms. Every one of those systems introduces potential entry points, and attackers know that somewhere inside that complexity, there is usually a simple oversight waiting to be discovered. One of the most common examples of this is something called credential reuse. Employees often create passwords for dozens of services, and over time those passwords begin to repeat. A login used for an internal system might also be used for a personal website, a forum account, or a shopping platform. When one of those unrelated websites experiences a data breach, the stolen credentials often appear in massive databases on the internet. Attackers download those databases and begin testing the usernames and passwords against corporate login systems. This process is called credential stuffing, and it's almost entirely automated. From the attacker's perspective, it's extremely efficient. Instead of trying to break encryption or exploit software vulnerabilities, they simply test millions of existing credentials and wait to see which ones still work. If an employee reused a password somewhere else on the internet, the attacker may suddenly have access to a corporate account without needing to hack anything at all. The only cost of the attack is the computing power required to run the automated login attempts. What makes credential stuffing especially dangerous is how frequently it works. Over the past decade, billions of usernames and passwords have been exposed in various data breaches across the internet. These credentials are often collected into massive databases that circulate on hacker forums and underground marketplaces. Some of these lists contain hundreds of millions of login combinations, all gathered from previous breaches. Attackers then use automated tools that can attempt thousands of logins per minute across different services. The software cycles through username and password combinations, testing them against corporate login pages, email services, and cloud platforms. If even a small percentage of those credentials are still valid, the attacker instantly gains access to real accounts. What's particularly concerning is that these attacks often don't trigger traditional security alarms. From the system's perspective, the attacker is logging in with the correct username and password. The activity might look like a normal login attempt, especially if the attacker routes the traffic through networks that mimic legitimate user locations. That means an attacker could gain access to a real employee account and begin exploring internal systems without immediately being detected. And once an attacker has access to a legitimate account, they often don't stop there. They look for ways to escalate their privileges, access additional systems, or move laterally through the organization. In many cases, the initial compromise might be something as simple as an employee reusing a password that they originally created for an online shopping account. Another example of small mistakes leading to large breaches comes from forgotten infrastructure. Large companies constantly deploy new servers, databases, and testing environments. Developers spin up temporary systems to test new features or analyze data. Ideally, those systems are shut down or secured once they are no longer needed. But in fast-moving development environments, things occasionally get left behind. A test database might remain exposed to the internet. Development server might still be running with default credentials. These forgotten systems are like unlocked doors that attackers can quietly walk through. Cloud infrastructure has made this problem even more common. Cloud services allow organizations to create new systems in minutes, which is incredibly powerful for development teams. But it also means there may be hundreds or thousands of cloud resources active at any given time. If even a small percentage of those systems are misconfigured, they can expose enormous amounts of sensitive data. In fact, many major breaches over the past decade have been traced back to cloud storage buckets that were accidentally left public. Another category of small but dangerous mistakes involves software updates. Every piece of software eventually develops vulnerabilities. When those vulnerabilities are discovered, developers release patches that fix the problem. But installing updates takes time and coordination, especially in large environments. Systems need to be tested to make sure updates don't break critical functionality. As a result, many organizations delay updates longer than they should. Attackers pay very close attention to these delays. The moment a new vulnerability becomes public, attackers begin scanning the internet looking for systems that haven't been patched yet. Automated tools can identify vulnerable servers in minutes. Once a vulnerable system is found, the attacker can run an exploit that gives them access to the machine. What makes this particularly frustrating for defenders is that the vulnerability may already have a fix available. The only reason the attack works is because the update wasn't installed yet. Another surprisingly common entry point is something known as third-party access. Modern companies rely heavily on external vendors and service providers, payroll systems, marketing platforms, analytics tools, and customer support systems often require some level of integration with internal company data. Each integration means another external organization may have some level of access to the company's systems. If that third-party provider has weaker security practices, attackers may choose to compromise the vendor instead of the company itself. This type of strategy has been used in several high-profile cyber attacks. Instead of attacking a heavily defended target directly, attackers compromise a smaller partner organization that already has trusted access. From there, they move into the larger company's systems using legitimate credentials and connections. Again, the attack doesn't necessarily require sophisticated hacking techniques. It simply requires identifying the weakest link in a network of connected systems. What all of these examples have in common is that they rely on ordinary human behavior and operational complexity. Large organizations are constantly evolving. Systems are being added, updated, removed, and integrated every day. In that environment, small mistakes are inevitable. Attackers know this, which is why they spend so much time scanning for low-effort opportunities. A forgotten server, a reused password, a delayed update, or a misconfigured cloud resource might seem trivial on its own. But for an attacker, any one of those mistakes can become the starting point for a much larger compromise. Cybersecurity professionals often talk about something called the attack surface. The attack surface is essentially the total number of possible entry points into a system or organization. As companies grow and adopt more technology, their attack surface grows as well. More devices, more accounts, more software, more integrations. Each of those components adds convenience and capability, but it also increases the number of places where a small oversight could become a vulnerability. This is why modern cybersecurity strategies focus heavily on reducing and monitoring that attack surface. Tools are used to continuously scan infrastructure for misconfigurations. Identity systems monitor unusual login behavior. Automated alerts trigger when systems become publicly exposed. None of these defenses are perfect, but together they help organizations detect small problems before attackers do. It's important to remember that cybersecurity is rarely about eliminating every possible vulnerability. It would be impossible. Instead, the goal is to make exploitation difficult enough that attackers move on to easier targets. Most cybercriminals are opportunistic. They are not emotionally invested in attacking a specific company. They simply want access to valuable data or financial systems. If one organization is well maintained and another is full of obvious weaknesses, attackers will almost always choose the easier path. So when people hear that a major company was compromised, they often assume the attackers must have used extremely advanced techniques. Sometimes that's true. But very often, the real story is much less dramatic. The breach started with a tiny oversight that seemed insignificant at the time. A small mistake that cost almost nothing to prevent eventually became the doorway into a much larger problem. Understanding this reality is one of the most important lessons in cybersecurity. The biggest risks are not always the most complex ones. Sometimes the most dangerous vulnerabilities are the ones that look too small to matter. For individuals and organizations alike, the lesson here is surprisingly simple. Many of the most effective cybersecurity defenses focus on addressing these small, preventable weaknesses before attackers can exploit them. Using unique passwords for every service dramatically reduces the risk of credential stuffing attacks. Multi-factor authentication adds another layer of protection. requiring attackers to obtain a second authentication factor even if they have the correct password. Regularly updating software ensures that known vulnerabilities are patched before attackers have a chance to exploit them. Organizations also invest heavily in monitoring tools that watch for unusual behavior. If an employee account suddenly begins logging in from multiple countries within minutes, or if a system starts accessing large amounts of sensitive data unexpectedly, those actions can trigger alerts for security teams to investigate. None of these protections rely on futuristic technology or complex algorithms. In fact, many of the most effective defenses are based on consistent operational practices and good security hygiene. The challenge is that maintaining those practices across thousands of users and systems requires constant attention. Because in cybersecurity, the difference between a secure system and a major breach can sometimes be a mistake that costs less than $1. If you want to understand how cyber attacks actually work and how organizations defend against them, subscribe to BreachBytes TV for weekly breakdowns of real cybersecurity threats and the hidden vulnerabilities behind them. See you in the next one.